In the summer of 1992, 12-year-old Emily Breyer leaves her family's remote farmhouse for a quick ride before dinner and never returns. 3 decades later, a rusted bicycle marked with her initials washes ashore on the banks of a lake 40 miles away, reigniting a mystery that never truly left the quiet Pennsylvania valley. The sun was beginning its slow descent beyond the hills when Emily Breyer wheeled her bike out of the barn. Dust curled around the tires as they bumped over the hard-packed dirt path, her worn sneakers pressing the pedals with light rhythm. She called back over her shoulder to her brother Dean, who was tossing pebbles into a rusted wash tub behind the farmhouse. "I'll be back before dinner," she shouted. Dean didn't look up. You always say that he muttered more to himself than to her. Emily grinned, not hearing him. It was June 22, 1992, and the hills that cradled the Breyer family's land were bathed in amber light. Her bike, a silver Schwinn with peeling blue handlebar tape, shimmered under the warmth. She wore her favorite denim jacket with the red stitching on the cuffs, and a shoelace had been looped around her handlebars, tied in a loose charm bracelet of pine cones and glass beads. She took the back path down toward Miller's Creek, a trail she knew better than the layout of her own house. Her mother, Clara, was inside humming and stirring stew in a dented pot that had served hundreds of meals over the years. Her father, Hank, sat on the porch, sharpening a dull scythe on a whetstone eyes, half focused on the trees swaying gently at the edge of the fields. Emily disappeared into those trees. By the time the sun dipped behind the distant ridgeline, dinner had long grown cold. Clara was the first to notice. She stood on the porch, wiping her hands on a checkered dish towel, and called Emily's name down the trail. Nothing. Dean looked up from his sketch pad, brows furrowed. Hank stood slow and deliberate, his shoulders tight. "She's probably just messing around the creek again," Hank said. But an hour later, when Clara and Dean walked the path with flashlights calling, and only the frogs answered, the fear set in like rot in the floorboards. By midnight, the neighbors were out. Sheriff Dalton arrived with 2 deputies, both looking too young and too tired. The dogs barked at every tree shadow. A lantern flickered against the barn wall, casting wild silhouettes that stretched and disappeared. They found no bike, no jacket, no Emily. Just one shoe, her left one, near the split-rail fence where the back path began to dip toward the woods. And the fence itself, a few slats broken. Recently, maybe she fell, a neighbor said, or someone helped her over. Dean sat silent by the porch swing, his hands clenched around the wooden armrest so tightly his knuckles ached. He hadn't seen her come back. No one had. By dawn, the fields looked the same as always, quiet, wind-licked, unbothered. But the Breyer family wasn't. The next day brought volunteers maps and flyers. Helicopters circled overhead. The local paper printed her face above the fold with the headline, "12-year-old Emily Breyer missing after evening ride." Clara couldn't bring herself to wash the dish towel Emily had last seen in her hands. Hank stopped shaving. He paced the perimeter of the fields each night like a man trying to remember the shape of something he once believed in. Dean barely spoke, and still no sign of the silver Schwinn or the girl who had ridden it into the trees. On the 4th day, a man from the next county brought a tracking dog. The hound followed the scent past the broken fence down the winding slope and stopped near the creek bed where it began to whimper and circle. They searched that area for days. They dragged the water. They knocked on every door in a 5-mile radius. But there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no clothing, only flattened grass and a few drops of something that might have been oil, or mud, or both. Eventually the hound stopped reacting. So did the town. After 2 weeks, the search was scaled back. The sheriff made a somber announcement on the courthouse steps. "We will continue to pursue any credible leads," he said, his eyes shadowed by a thick brow. "But as of now, we have exhausted all active search efforts." Clara collapsed in the kitchen the next morning. She spent 3 days in the hospital and emerged a ghost of herself, speaking only when spoken to. Dean stopped drawing. Hank bought a padlock for the barn, and the fields swayed on, unbothered, keeping their secrets. The barn stood solemn and silent that summer, its red paint peeling in long, dry strips like skin after sunburn. By August, grass had overtaken the wheel ruts where Emily's Schwinn once rolled down the path to the creek. Clara refused to go near it. Dean would glance toward it from his bedroom window, but never crossed the threshold again. The missing shoe remained in the sheriff's evidence locker for a while, but with no body and no crime scene, it was eventually released back to the family. Clara kept it on a shelf in the laundry room, unwilling to bury just half of her daughter. The broken fence near the edge of the property remained untouched for months. No one could bring themselves to repair it. The official story circulated quickly. Emily must have run off. Maybe she was unhappy. Maybe she had an online friend, a stranger from the new world of home dial-up and email addresses. Maybe she got lost in the woods and met with an accident no one could see. People in town liked to tie stories up neatly, even if they had to imagine the knots. The truth was simpler, no one knew. That didn't stop the whispers. It never did in a town like Wicklow. I always thought something was off about Hank. Mrs. Dunley whispered over canned corn in the grocer's. Too quiet, too brooding. Did you see the way he just stared when they asked him about the broken fence? Others pointed to Dean. That boy don't speak right since she vanished, someone said. He's hiding something. And Clara, once the smiling woman who baked pies for church raffles, had become a ghost, with a grocery list slipping in and out of public view with eyes that wouldn't meet yours. A year passed, then 2, then 5. Dean graduated from high school and left for community college in Harrisburg. Hank worked the fields like a man on borrowed time. Clara picked up hours at the town library shelving books she no longer read. The farmhouse quieted further. The echoes of Emily's voice, once so vibrant in its halls, became hard to remember. Her room was left exactly as it had been. The bed made. The small corkboard still pinned with leaf rubbings and Polaroids of the dog she'd begged for, but never received. Every now and then, someone would mention her in town. A kid at school might ask Dean years ago what really happened. A neighbor might stop Hank and offer a strained "too late thinking of you." But most just moved on. Stories fade, people forget. By the 20th anniversary, only Clara kept the date in her calendar. She took a walk to the creek each year, always alone, always early in the morning, when the mist still curled along the grass like breath held too long. The new sheriff, a younger man named Kepler, inherited the old file in a brittle cardboard box when he took office in 2010. He leafed through it once. Photos, statements, hand-drawn maps. Nothing that hadn't already been reviewed a dozen times. There were no new leads, no fresh eyes, just the quiet, bitter kind of unsolved mystery that settled like smoke. Until June 2023. A boy named Caleb Brinson, age 11, was fishing at the edge of Harlow Lake, some 40 miles east of Wicklow, when he spotted something tangled in the reeds near the shallows. It was metallic, thin, and curved, just barely visible beneath the glint of water and algae. He thought it was an old grocery cart at first. Then he saw the tire spokes. His father came down with a pole and prodded it free. It wasn't easy, it was buried deep under years of silt and vegetation. But after an hour of sweating and tugging, they pulled it onto the shore. It was a bicycle. Rust had overtaken most of it, but one handlebar was still intact. Wrapped around it was a deteriorated strip of blue tape, and beneath the grime scratched into the metal frame were 2 initials. E.B. The Brinsons didn't know what they had. They posted a photo on Facebook with the caption, "Anyone lose a bike?" Like a long time ago. By midnight, the post had spread. Wicklow residents began commenting, then messaging, then calling. By morning, someone tagged Sheriff Kepler. By noon, the bike was in evidence. Clara didn't believe it when Kepler came to her door. She couldn't. Her hand shook as she turned over the printed photo. Her lips pressed into a firm, trembling line. "I etched that," she whispered. "Right before her birthday. She asked me to make it permanent. Said it made her feel like it was hers forever." Kepler nodded. "We'll be reopening the case." Clara touched the edge of the image, staring at the faint outline of that silver frame rusted like bones in the sun. She couldn't stop looking. "She never made it to the creek," she said. "That lake. It's too far." "She never rode that far." Kepler raised a brow. "You're sure?" Clara nodded once. "Absolutely. She was afraid of getting lost. Wouldn't leave the woods behind our place." The sheriff said nothing at first, but something began to flicker behind his eyes. A gear turning, a question forming. "So how the hell," he murmured, "did her bike end up at Harlow Lake?" Sheriff Kepler sat alone in his office that night, the photograph of the bike propped against the wall behind his desk. He stared at it, the way you might stare at an old bruise, curious, confused, slightly unnerved by the persistence of something meant to fade. The initials were still visible even through the rust. EB, not a generic engraving. Not random. It matched the police report from 1992. The brand, the size, the style, the blue handlebar tape. All of it. He leaned back and opened the original case file. The pages smelled of mildew and dust. Emily's school photo was paper-clipped to the first report, smiling, wide teeth, crooked bangs cut unevenly. In the margin of one page, the original sheriff had scribbled "Bike never recovered." Until now. He flipped to the topographical maps, tracing the terrain between the Briar Farmhouse and Harlow Lake. It wasn't just far, it was nearly impossible by bike. Thick woods, no roads for miles, and terrain that narrowed into cliffs and streams. Emily would have had to cross private property train tracks and a steep ravine, and she had only said she'd be gone for a short ride. Kepler picked up the phone and called the Pennsylvania State Police. It was time to bring in forensic recovery. By the next morning, the bike was secured, photographed again, and taken to the lab in Altoona. Analysts confirmed the wear was consistent with years in water, but curiously, they found scratches along the rear fork that seemed newer, less oxidized. It was as though the bike had been recently disturbed, moved even before surfacing in the lake. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her daughter's old room for the first time in over a decade. She opened drawers, touched the spine of Emily's books, ran her fingers over the glass on the framed picture of Emily and Dean at the county fair. Then she opened the closet. Emily's other shoe sat on the shelf untouched, matching the one found near the broken fence. Clara lifted it, held it against her chest, and began to cry for the first time in years. Downstairs, Dean was back for a visit, pacing the porch. He hadn't seen his mother this undone in years. She seemed both broken and strangely awake, like something dormant had cracked open. That night, he sat across from her at the kitchen table. "You really think it's hers?" he asked. Clara nodded. "I know it. She would have never left it behind on purpose." Dean hesitated. "So, what does that mean?" Clara stared past him through the window into the orchard beyond the field. The trees had grown in since the 90s, but she remembered what it used to look like. "She didn't just get lost," she said softly. "Someone took her." Dean swallowed. "You think Dad—" "No," Clara interrupted quickly, sharply. "Don't even start with that." "But the cops did," Dean said. "Back then, you know they did." Clara's expression turned stone cold. "Your father wasn't perfect, but he didn't hurt her. She didn't have proof. But she had something stronger, conviction born of years of silence and grief." The next day, Kepler began re-interviewing people involved in the original search. He started with Dale Tennyson, who had led the volunteer search party in '92. Dale still lived in Wicklow, now a retired postal worker with failing eyesight and a mean cough. Kepler met him on his porch. "You still remember that search?" Kepler asked. Dale coughed into a handkerchief. every step of it. We combed that land for 6 days. Dogs' flashlights, half the town out there. You don't forget something like that. Did anything feel off to you? Kepler asked. Something maybe you didn't report. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah. There was this guy stranger I didn't recognize, kept hovering around the woods just outside the Briar property. Never came to check in, never joined the search. Just watched. Yellow cap. I figured he was some vagrant." Kepler's ears perked up. "You ever tell Sheriff Dalton?" Dale shook his head. "Didn't seem important at the time. And back then, people didn't think like they do now. Stranger wasn't cause for panic. Figured he'd just wandered off. Could you describe him? Tall, stringy, wore glasses, weird, limp. The kind of guy you'd forget if you weren't trying to remember." Kepler took notes. "You ever see him again?" "No, not once." Kepler thanked him and left. But that yellow cap detail gnawed at him. It wasn't in any file, no record of it. Back at the station, he pulled the personnel logs for the search party, cross-checked them with statements. No one else mentioned a man in a yellow cap. No strangers. No vagrants. No unaccounted-for observers. It was like the man never existed. That night, Kepler sat with the map of Harlow Lake tracing routes, wondering how a 12-year-old's bike could have ended up there unless someone brought it. And if someone brought the bike, where was Emily? The lake had more secrets, he was sure of it. He picked up the phone and called a dive team. "I want a sweep of Harlow's eastern cove," he said. "And I want it yesterday." The dive team arrived at Harlow Lake 2 days later, dragging behind them a weathered aluminum boat, sonar gear, and the heavy silence that accompanied old cold cases. Sergeant Lynn Morales led the operation, a seasoned recovery specialist who'd spent 2 decades pulling the past out of water. Kepler stood on the rocky shore watching as they prepared the equipment. He pointed to a marshy inlet lined with cattails and stunted birch trees. "That's where the bike was found. Just about 20 feet out," he said. "But I want a full scan of the area within a 100-yard radius. We don't know how long it's been down there. We don't know if something else is still waiting." Morales nodded, face unreadable. "We'll sweep it. Mud down there is thick. Could have buried more than you think." The team slid into the water without a splash, their black suits vanishing into the greenish murk. The boat drifted into the cove, sonar pings echoing faintly across the surface like distant calls for help. On shore, Kepler paced. Back in Wicklow, Clara stood alone in the attic, the musty air thick with the scent of cedar and dust. She hadn't been up there in years. The pull-down ladder groaned beneath her weight. Emily's things had been boxed and tucked away long ago, schoolwork craft projects, old Halloween costumes. She opened a bin labeled Emily 1991 and ran her fingers across the top sheet, a crayon drawing of the farmhouse complete with chickens, the orchard, and a lopsided, smiley-faced sun. But it was the second box that stopped her. It was heavier. Its edges were taped and retaped with yellowed masking tape, and her mother's handwriting was scrawled in pencil across the lid. "Private, do not open." She hesitated. Her mother, Ruth, had lived with them during Emily's early childhood. She'd passed away in 2004 and left little behind. Clara had never questioned what she'd stored up here. With a pocket knife, she sliced the tape. Inside were stacks of old papers, yellowed news clippings, and at the bottom, a small wooden box with brass latches. She opened it. A scarf, red and frayed, and darker, rusty stains along the fringe. She froze. Her heart pounded in her ears as she lifted the scarf. Beneath it, several Polaroids of Emily, playing with Dean, riding her bike, and a sketch, a strange, unchildlike pencil sketch of a man, tall, narrow face, wearing a wide yellow cap and thick glasses. In large block letters at the top, written in what was unmistakably Emily's handwriting, "The man by the fence." Clara's hands trembled. She sat back on her heels, unable to breathe. Why had Ruth hidden this? Why hadn't she told anyone? At Harlow Lake, the divers resurfaced. Morales removed her mask and gestured for Kepler to step forward. "We found something," she said grimly. "Not a body, but something." From the boat, they pulled a waterproof barrel sealed tightly, algae and silt encrusting its sides. It took 2 people to haul it to shore. The lid was rusted, but gave way under leverage. Inside, waterlogged toys, girls' clothing, a rotted lunchbox with a faded cartoon unicorn on the front, and a lock of brown hair tied with pink thread. Kepler stepped back, nausea crawling up his spine. It was like a time capsule left to rot. He looked at Morales. "Anything with a name." She nodded and handed him a sodden note sealed inside a plastic bag. The ink was blurred, but the handwriting still legible. "Hi," she cried when he put her in the dark. "I tried to stop him. I'm sorry." No signature, no explanation. But that phrase, "put her in the dark," kept spinning in Kepler's head like a wheel stuck in the mud. He called Clara. She didn't answer. He tried Dean next. Dean was already on the road, heading back to the farmhouse. Clara had called him just after opening the attic box, voice tight, whispering, "I found something in Mom's things." "It's him, Dean." I think she knew who he was, who he asked. The man, the one who took Emily. Dean sped the whole way home. When he arrived, Clara was waiting on the porch, holding the drawing in shaking hands. He stared at the sketch. "That's the guy Dale Tennyson mentioned," he murmured. "The one with the yellow cap." Clara nodded. "And look, this wasn't Emily's drawing style. It's tighter. Too realistic. I think Ruth drew this. From memory. Or from something she saw. But why wouldn't she tell anyone?" Clara's face hardened. "Because she never trusted police. Not after what happened to her brother in '58. She probably thought she could figure it out herself." Dean looked at her, a sick feeling rising in his throat. And if she did, Clara turned toward the barn. She would have hidden the proof. They walked to the barn together, each step heavier than the last. Hank had padlocked it after Emily vanished, and the key had long been lost. Dean took a crowbar from the tool shed and pried it open. The door creaked wide. Inside, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, old tools, hay bales, the broken-down tractor. They checked behind shelves, under tarps, between the wall beams. Nothing. Until Clara noticed a strange break in the floorboards under the rear window, a square outline in the planks, faint but visible. Dean pried it up. Below, a hollowed-out space lined with brick. Inside, wrapped in a mildewed sheet, was a small cardboard box. Dean lifted it out slowly, heart-hammering. Inside, an old cassette tape labeled in faded ink. Emily, July '92, and a small wooden cross painted pink and chipped at the edges. Clara gasped. "That's hers. That's the one she made in Sunday school. I remember." Dean held up the tape, throat dry. She must have recorded something. They stood in silence, barn wind whispering around them, history pressing down like a weight. "Tomorrow," Dean said, "we find a player." Clara clutched the cross to her chest and nodded. "Tomorrow," she echoed. The next morning dawned gray and windless, the kind of Pennsylvania sky that held its breath. Inside the farmhouse, Dean rooted through the hall closet until he found the old boombox, its surface coated with a fine layer of dust. He tested the buttons, sticky but functional. The tape deck groaned when opened, but it clicked back into place with the satisfying sound of something old remembering how to live. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the wooden cross from the barn still clutched in her hands, fingers moving over its paint-chipped surface like prayer beads. Dean set the boombox down and inserted the tape. He hesitated. "You ready?" Clara gave a single shallow nod. He pressed play. The tape clicked. A low hum of static filled the room, followed by a soft, breathy rustling. Then a girl's voice, thin, nervous, unmistakably young. I don't know if this is working, but this is Emily. If someone finds this, I'm at the orchard." I think I'm being followed. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Dean froze. Emily's voice was shaking now. There's a man. He was outside the window last night, wearing yellow. He watched me after dinner. Mom said it was probably just someone from the road, but I don't think he left. Rustling again, then whispering. I tried to tell Dad, but he got mad. Said not to make stuff up. Said I always did this when I didn't want to do chores. Dean stared at the boombox, a knot forming in his chest. More static. A pause. Then Emily's voice again, even fainter. He was near the barn today. I saw him through the boards. I'm going to hide this. I hope someone hears me. The recording cut off with a hollow click. Silence fell like a curtain in the room. Clara sat still for a long moment. Then she whispered, she knew. Dean's voice was tight. That drawing wasn't Ruth's. It was Emily's. She saw him enough times to remember his face. Clara nodded slowly, eyes wide with something between fear and clarity. She knew, and she tried to tell us. Sheriff Kepler sat in his office listening to the same tape through studio headphones. When it ended, he took them off slowly and folded his hands. He called Morales at the lake. I think this wasn't a one-time thing, he said. Morales raised an eyebrow. You think he was stalking her? Kepler's gaze turned hard. I think he was living nearby. Hiding. Watching. Maybe for months, she exhaled. You think he's the one who dumped the bike? Kepler shook his head. No. I think he took her. And kept her. And I think we missed him because we weren't looking under our feet. Back at the Breyer property, Clara and Dean returned to the barn and explored the space beneath the floorboards more thoroughly. Dean lowered himself into the hollow flashlight in hand. The bricks were crumbling, patched with dirt and time. Then he saw it, a crack in the back wall. Closer inspection revealed a seam hidden under years of grime. Dean scraped away at it with his hand. The flashlight flickered off something metal, a small latch. He pulled. The brick panel creaked open like a door revealing a narrow tunnel. Earth-packed, shored with old wood beams, it disappeared beneath the orchard in a jagged slope. Clara stared down in horror. What is that? Dean answered quietly, bootlegger tunnel. I've read about them used during Prohibition. Smugglers used to dig them between barns and fields to move product at night. But why would someone hide it? Dean shined the light deeper in. Maybe because it led somewhere. He retrieved rope from the shed, tied it to a beam, and dropped into the tunnel with the flashlight swinging. The air was thick with rot and old soil. The tunnel angled sharply, floor littered with broken roots and shattered glass. He followed it for 10 feet, then 20. Finally, he reached an opening into a larger chamber, maybe once a storage room, maybe a hideout. There, under a canvas tarp, he found 3 small wooden crates. One held liquor bottles, one was empty. The third held something else entirely, a small dirt-caked blanket, a child's shoe, and a plastic bracelet, pink and green beads spelling out the name Emily. Dean's hands shook. He called back up the tunnel voice, ragged. Mom? You need to come down here. Clara arrived minutes later, her flashlight trembling. When she saw the bracelet, her knees buckled. She was here, she whispered. Dean scanned the walls. Old initials and symbols were carved into the wood. Some just dates, 1919, 1933, but one carving stood out slashed across a rotting beam. JW inside a triangle. I've seen that before, Clara said. Dean turned. Where? Clara looked pale. On a sign, near the gas station. One of those hand-carved wood plaques you hang on fences. Property of JW. Kepler confirmed it hours later. The land behind the orchard once belonged to a reclusive carpenter named Jacob Whitlow, who died in 1996. A man with no known family. He lived in a single-room hunting shack deep in the woods past the Breyer farm. Lived alone, Kepler said. Didn't pay taxes. Had a long beard. Neighbors thought he was strange, But he had a permit to be there. Was he ever questioned? Clara asked. Kepler shook his head. No record of it. He died in a house fire. No one followed up because it happened 4 years after Emily disappeared. They assumed he wasn't involved. Dean clenched his jaw. We assumed wrong. Kepler narrowed his eyes. Let's see what's left of that shack. By evening, they reached the old foundation. The structure was long gone, burned to the ground. But beneath the char, they found the warped outline of a trapdoor. It creaked open with effort. Inside, blackness, and a ladder leading down. The ladder groaned as Kepler descended first his flashlight, cutting a narrow beam through the suffocating dark. The scent was thick mildew-scorched wood and something deeper, older. Earth and rot. It clung to the walls like breath held too long. The space beneath the shack wasn't large, but it had been deliberately constructed. Stone walls braced the dirt, forming a root cellar of sorts, though far too clean to be storage. It was too square, too neat, and too silent. Morales followed behind her, voice low. It's not just a cellar. This was used. She swept her flashlight in slow arcs. On the far wall hung a row of rusty nails. Some still held remnants of fabric scraps of denim, a faded ribbon, a broken zipper. Below them sat a small wooden chair, child-sized, its legs chewed at the base by mice or time. Dean stepped down next, then Clara. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the barn. But now she stared at the cellar floor, lips trembling. There was a mattress, molded and blackened, pushed into the corner. A bucket, an old plastic lantern long dead, and beside the chair a pile of books half decayed. Most of them water-damaged beyond saving. Dean bent down, picked one up. Emily's, he said, voice hollow. He turned the inside cover. Her handwriting. She wrote her name. Morales snapped on a fresh pair of gloves and carefully opened the top book. Inside was a torn page covered in jagged, frantic writing. He keeps me here. He says if I'm good, I can leave. I don't believe him anymore. Clara turned away, her hand over her mouth. Dean stood trembling, staring at the wall. The truth settled over them, not like a revelation, but like a long-held breath finally exhaled. She didn't die that day, Clara whispered. She was here, for days, maybe weeks. Kepler walked the perimeter, flashlight catching faint scratches on the walls. Tally marks. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Impossible to count. Morales crouched near the far corner. Sir, she said. Over here. Something was lodged behind the stone, a glass jar sealed with wax. Inside, scraps of cloth, and what appeared to be a note curled and stained. They bagged it and labeled it for evidence. Kepler turned to Clara. This wasn't just someone taking a girl and panicking. This was someone planning. Someone who watched, waited, and built a place to keep her. Dean's jaw tightened. And someone who got away with it. For 31 years. Kepler's radio buzzed. Sheriff, you're going to want to hear this. We found something else at the bottom of the lake. By late afternoon, Kepler stood again on the rocky shoreline of Harlow Lake, this time near the deeper edge of the eastern cove. Divers had retrieved a second sealed container, this one metallic military style with reinforced locks. It had been deeply buried in the silt, partially fused to a rotted wooden crate. When they cracked it open, the smell of rust and decay poured out. Inside, old cassette tapes, dozens of them, each labeled with a date, each one beginning with EB in ink. Morales lifted one gently. You think these are recordings? Kepler nodded. Of her, of him. The dates ranged from June 25 to July 12, 1992. 3 weeks of entries. He turned to the forensic team. We need these digitized immediately. No one listens to them but me. Not until we know what's on them. That night, Kepler sat in the evidence room with headphones on the tapes lined up like tombstones beside him. The first one clicked, hissed, then played. A girl's voice, soft, resigned. Day 2. He gave me soup today. Said I should be grateful. I asked for my mom. He didn't like that. A pause. He said if I scream again, he'll take something from me. I don't know what that means. Tape 2, day 4. I think it's raining. I can hear it. He says the lake's too high now, that it'll swallow everything if I try to leave. Tape 5, day 7. He brought a radio. Said if I behave, I can listen. I told him I didn't want to. He laughed. Said nobody would believe me anyway. Kepler removed the headphones and ran a hand over his face. The tapes continued, each one more haunting than the last. Some were short, others long and filled with long silences broken by sobs or distant unintelligible humming. But it was tape 12 that stopped him cold. Emily's voice frightened, whispering. I heard another voice. Not his. A woman, I think. She told him to stop, said this was going too far. I think she's scared too. A woman. Kepler rewound, played it again. The phrase was clear, this is going too far. Was someone else involved? He logged the audio and called Morales. There might have been a second person, he said. A woman. I want names. Anyone tied to Jacob Whitlow. Neighbors, co-workers, distant family. We need to find her. Back in the farmhouse, Clara listened to the digitized recordings late into the night alone in Emily's room. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She listened. She cataloged. She took notes. And when one of the tapes described a humming tune, a lullaby she used to sing when Emily was sick, Clara sank slowly to the floor. He made her remember me, she whispered. Somehow that was worse than forgetting. Dean stood outside the door listening too. His fists clenched. We're not stopping, he said. No, Clara agreed. We're not. 3 days after the discovery of the tapes, Sheriff Kepler received a phone call from an archivist at the County Hall of Records in Warren County. She spoke quickly, voice tense. You were looking into Jacob Whitlow, right? Yes, Kepler said, sitting up straighter. What did you find? There's something odd. I went through the old permit logs from the late 80s. Whitlow filed to expand his property. He listed a co-signer. Kepler blinked. A co-signer. Name was Lorraine Adler. No address, no tax ID. But I traced her. Kepler grabbed a pen. Go on. She lived in a mobile home just outside of Holton Ridge. Worked at a nursery. Quiet. Vanished in 1993. Vanished. Kepler's breath caught. She just disappeared, he asked. No missing persons report. No forwarding address. She just stopped showing up. Neighbors assumed she'd moved. Kepler leaned back in his chair. You have any idea how she was connected to Whitlow? Only what's in the property documents. She helped fund part of the shack's construction, bought the lumber receipts, delivered under her name. Kepler hung up and immediately called Morales. We've got a name. Lorraine Adler, connected to Whitlow. She might have been the second voice on those tapes. Morales whistled low. If she was there, she might have helped. Or she tried to stop him, Kepler replied. Either way, we need to find her alive or dead. That same afternoon, Clara was walking the orchard alone. She'd taken to wandering there every morning, visiting the ghost of her daughter in the wind between the trees. But today, she found something strange, something that hadn't been there before. Near the base of an old pear tree, under a patch of loosened soil, a glint of metal caught her eye. She bent down and unearthed it, a charm bracelet. Faded pink. The letters barely legible. L.A. Her breath caught. She knelt, digging further. Beneath the bracelet lay a small velvet pouch wrapped in twine. Inside a cassette, no label, just dust and time. She rushed it to Dean, who immediately digitized it. They listened together, breathless, the volume turned low. A woman's voice. Soft, frightened, but adult. I don't know why I'm recording this. I think it's guilt. I think he'll find this before anyone else does. But if someone's listening, my name is Lorraine Adler, and I need to say what happened. Clara gripped the arm of her chair. Dean stared at the waveform as it flickered across the screen. He took her. The voice continued. The girl. Emily. He said it was for protection, that her parents were hurting her. But he was lying. I saw it too late. A breath. A pause. He kept her in the cellar. He talked to her like she was a pet. I begged him to let her go. He wouldn't. I tried to feed her when he wasn't looking. I tried to tell her stories to make the dark easier. Dean pressed pause. She was real. Clara nodded, and she tried to help. He resumed playback. He said he was going to move her, said the lake was cleaner. I knew what that meant. I couldn't stop him. I wanted to, but I was scared. I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm so... The tape cut off with a thump, as if it had been interrupted, as if someone had yanked the recorder away. Dean sat back pale. She buried it here. Why our orchard, Clara asked. Dean stared out the window. Because she wanted us to find it. She knew someday the trees would give it back. Sheriff Kepler drove to Holton Ridge that evening. The mobile home where Lorraine once lived had collapsed in on itself, its roof-caved vines swallowing the siding. But neighbors still remembered her. She was quiet, one woman said, her face lined with time. Used to hum a lot, wore big sunglasses, looked scared most of the time. Anyone see her after 93? The woman shook her head. Nope, vanished just like that. One day she was here, next day gone. Kepler asked if anyone had searched the property. No need, the woman shrugged. She didn't have no one to report her missing. Kepler brought in cadaver dogs. They found her bones beneath the porch, shallow, rushed, as if someone had buried her in a panic. Morales stood beside the gravesite, arms folded. She tried to do the right thing, she said, and he killed her for it, Kepler finished. Back in Wicklow, Clara sat on Emily's bed, turning the bracelet over in her fingers. L.A. She repeated the initials aloud. She must have dropped it when she buried the tape. Dean nodded. She probably knew she wouldn't make it far. For the first time since the bike resurfaced, Clara allowed herself to hope. Not hope that Emily was alive. That was long gone. But hope that she hadn't died completely alone. Kepler returned to the lake the next morning. Divers began sweeping the last section of shoreline near the dock remains. At 11:17 a.m., sonar pinged something heavy in the silt. They pulled up a rusted metal trunk. Inside, fabric remnants of rope and a water-damaged journal. The cover torn. Pages stuck together. Kepler opened the first legible page. It was Emily's handwriting. If I don't get out, this is what happened to me. The journal pages were fragile, the ink warped by moisture and time. Kepler and Morales wore gloves, turning each sheet with the care one might give to sacred scripture. Much of it was illegible, blurred letters, pages stuck together by mold, but enough survived to tell a story. The handwriting was unmistakably Emily's, slanted, deliberate, with the occasional childish loop or heart drawn above an I. June 28, 1992. He says he's saving me. But from what I asked for my mom again, he told me she was dead. I didn't believe him. I screamed for a long time today. He didn't feed me. July 6, 1992. He keeps talking to someone who isn't there. A woman. I think she's real. She whispers when he's gone. I think she left something near the stairs. Maybe a key. July 4th, 1992. He said we're going on a trip. He keeps packing jars. I don't want to go. I don't want to be in the dark anymore. Kepler closed the book and looked at Morales. She knew. She understood. This wasn't confusion. She was documenting. Morales nodded, her voice low. She was planning to leave a record, in case. Back in Wicklow, Clara sat on the porch, holding the latest copy of the report. Dean had printed out the translated pages from Emily's journal. She read them over and over, committing every line to memory. I always told her to write things down, she said softly. even when she was little. Told her it helped put her thoughts in order. Dean sat next to her, shoulders tight. She listened, he said. A silence settled between them, heavy with loss and something like pride. They had a piece of her now, a sliver of who she was in those last days. Not just what happened, but how she endured it. Kepler brought in experts to map the entirety of the Whitlow property and cross-reference the underground tunnels. What they found was staggering. The orchard tunnel, the one beneath the Briar barn, was only one of three. Whitlow had constructed a network. One branch led to the shack. Another curved toward a dried-out creek bed. A third, almost collapsed, led to what appeared to be a secondary cellar buried under brush near the north ridge. Inside that secondary chamber, they found the remains of another girl's shoe. Not Emily's. Kepler's face paled. This wasn't the first time. Fingerprints on the jar lids recovered from the lake suggested someone other than Whitlow had handled them. A match came back Lorraine Adler. She hadn't just been a bystander. She'd helped maintain the space, brought supplies, and according to the audio, she'd tried to stop him. They found her bones buried under her mobile home. Likely killed in late 1992, not long after Emily vanished. A grim picture formed. Whitlow had stalked his victims, dug out his holding cells in advance. He lured or snatched girls, brought them through the tunnels, and kept them until they broke or died. But Emily had written, she'd drawn, she'd recorded, and through that, she had refused to disappear. That night, Dean sorted through another crate recovered from the shack's burned remains. Most of it was destroyed, but one scorched journal survived. It wasn't Emily's, it was Whitlow's. The entries were scattered, unhinged. Ramblings about purity, salvation, his mission. Most pages were indecipherable, descending into scribbles and crosses. But one entry stood out. She won't break. She sings in the dark, like a bell. Makes the voices stop. I can't have that. Dean shuddered. He hated her strength, he said to himself. He imagined Emily trapped in that cellar, humming lullabies in the dark, trying to stay sane, trying to remember who she was. She hadn't broken. Even in the recordings, her voice remained clear. Frightened, yes, but composed. Intentional. She had fought. On July 15th, Kepler held a press conference on the courthouse steps. News vans from 3 counties showed up. Cameras, microphones, bright lights for a town that had forgotten how to stand in them. Kepler stepped to the podium, a copy of the report in his hand. We have officially closed the investigation into the 1992 disappearance of Emily Briar. Evidence collected over the past 3 weeks has led us to the conclusion that she was abducted, held, and eventually murdered by a man named Jacob Whitlow. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. We also have reason to believe Whitlow had assistance from a woman named Lorraine Adler, who may have tried to intervene before her own death in late 1992. This was a tragedy long buried, and one we failed to uncover for decades. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. But Emily left breadcrumbs, tapes, drawings, a journal. She fought to be remembered. And because of that, we now know what happened. No questions were asked. No applause followed. Just silence. It was enough. Clara held a private memorial 2 days later. No open casket, no flowers. Just a small wooden box containing the pink bracelet, the journal, and a printout of one of Emily's drawings, the farmhouse, the orchard, a bright blue sky. Dean placed the drawing inside the box and nailed the lid shut. Together they buried it beneath the oldest tree in the orchard. She's home now, Clara said. Dean nodded. She always was. The leaves whispered above them, caught in a breeze neither of them felt, as if the orchard itself exhaled. The orchard settled back into its rhythm as summer waned. Wind curled through the tall grass, and sunlight dappled the fruit-heavy branches as if nature were slowly smoothing over the raw edges of what had been unearthed. But Wicklow had changed. You could feel it in the eyes of its residents, in the way neighbors looked at each other, at old barns, at the woods that used to be playgrounds for unsupervised children. The Breyer case wasn't just a closed chapter. It was a reopened wound, a reminder that evil had made a quiet home among them for decades. Some avoided the Breyer farmhouse, now not out of disrespect, but out of shame. Others brought offerings, jam jars, sympathy cards, candles and glass with Emily's school photo taped to the front. Clara didn't leave the porch for several days after the burial beneath the orchard. She sat in the same spot each morning, hands folded, eyes trained toward the tree line. Dean returned to Philadelphia briefly to tie up some work and pack his remaining things. He couldn't bring himself to stay away long. When he returned home for good, he brought with him a plan. He met Kepler at the station with a folder full of notes. "I want to document everything," Dean said. Not just what happened, but how it was missed. The gaps, the delays, the signs. Kepler flipped through the pages. Interview transcripts, timeline reconstructions, photographs of the tunnel and cellar drawings of Emily's from the evidence catalog. "You want to write it?" Kepler asked. Dean nodded. Emily left the first draft. "We just have to finish it." Kepler gave him his blessing and every file in the case archive. Meanwhile, Clara had begun speaking with the state's Department of Victim Services. She wanted a grant. Not for a memorial, but something else. A program. For rural counties. To teach families how to spot stalkers, how to document suspicious behavior, how to listen to the people others call dramatic or imaginative. Emily told us, she said in her letter. We just didn't listen. The grant was approved in early fall. The first meeting was held at the Wicklow Town Library, in the same room where Clara had once shelved books in silence. Now she stood before a dozen families, telling them what it felt like to bury a daughter without a body, and to find her voice 3 decades later. In September, the last of the tapes were reviewed. One had been badly damaged, tape-twisted, plastic casing cracked, but with enough restoration, the final minute was extracted. It was dated July 12, 1992. Emily's voice, weak, tired, spoke slowly, almost as if she were dreaming. I don't know if he's coming back today. I don't know if the lady is still upstairs. I hear birds again. I think I saw light under the door. I wrote in the book. I sang so I wouldn't forget Mom's voice. A pause. I think I'll sleep now. Maybe when I wake up, I'll be home. The audio clicked off. Morales cried for the first time since joining the investigation. Kepler didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he labeled the file, Final Entry, Archive A. In early October, construction crews arrived at the former Whitlow property. The township had decided to level the remnants of the burned shack and the collapsed tunnels. The orchard, they agreed, would remain untouched, Clara's only request. As the crew dug up the final beams of the root cellar, one worker struck something solid, a box, sealed metal. Kepler was called. Inside, a pocket knife, a small silver ring, and a faded photo of a different girl. Blonde, wearing overalls, smiling. She wasn't Emily. She wasn't anyone from Wicklow. Facial recognition identified her as Hannah Royce, missing from Meade Township in 1988. Her case had been declared a runaway. No follow-up. No search. The discovery sparked a statewide review of long, cold missing persons cases. Whitlow's name was now tethered to 5 more disappearances. Dean amended the title of his book, The Orchard Girls, What the Trees Remember. By Thanksgiving, a plaque was installed at the edge of the Breyer orchard. In memory of Emily Breyer, 1980-1992, she sang in the dark so we would hear her, and now we do. Below it, a second plaque was added, and to Lorraine Adler, who tried to stop the silence. Dean visited the plaque each morning. Sometimes he read aloud from Emily's journal. Sometimes he just sat in the grass and watched the leaves. One morning, he noticed a child's drawing pinned beneath a stone at the base of the tree. A crayon sun, a girl with brown hair, a bright pink bike. Dean knelt to pick it up, turning it over. The back read, For Emily. I hope you got home. He smiled, tears warming his eyes. She did, he whispered. Then he stood and walked back toward the house, the leaves rustling behind him, telling a story only the orchard could understand. Snow arrived early in Wicklow that year, blanketing the orchard in a thick hush. The limbs of the pear trees sagged under the weight of white, their golden leaves having fallen weeks before. The farmhouse lights glowed amber in the early dusk, and the cold made every breath visible a reminder that time moved on whether or not anyone was ready. Dean awoke before sunrise each morning, driven by a compulsion that even he couldn't fully explain. The manuscript was nearly finished, every chapter carved out like an excavation of memory and loss. Each sentence formed a bridge between Emily's voice and the silence that had followed her disappearance. Clara's strength had returned in quiet ways. She no longer sat for hours on the porch. Instead, she baked again. She taught herself how to digitize old tapes and helped transcribe Lorraine Adler's confession line by line until her knuckles ached. Sheriff Kepler visited often. He brought files, shared updates, and sometimes sat in silence drinking Clara's coffee as though it were penance. The town had softened toward the Bryars. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. They had failed a little girl once. They were determined not to do it again. Clara started speaking at schools. Dean was interviewed by the Harrisburg Patriot. The orchard became a place people visited quietly, leaving tokens at the base of the old tree. Ribbons, drawings, folded notes. Children who had once grown up on stories of the girl who vanished now knew her name. Emily wasn't a whisper anymore. She was a presence. One morning, Dean found an envelope taped to the farmhouse gate. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. Emily seated on a hay bale. A Polaroid. Her jacket slightly oversized, her bangs too long. Dean stared at it for a long time. On the back in faded ink, she smiled like that at everyone, even him. There was no signature. He brought it inside and showed Clara. Her face paled, then softened. "That was taken a week before she disappeared," she murmured. She loved that jacket. Said it made her look grown up. "Where did it come from?" Dean asked. "Who still had this?" They never found out. The envelope held no fingerprints, no DNA, no hint of origin. But it didn't matter. The photo joined the others on Emily's shelf, framed in soft wood, a ribbon tucked into the corner. In December, the final report on the Bryer case was released. It included evidence logs, forensic summaries, recovered media, and a 72-page timeline. Kepler delivered the first printed copy to Clara and Dean. Dean slid it beside the manuscript draft. "I want this to be the appendix," he said. Kepler nodded. The full truth. No edits. That week, The Orchard Girls was submitted to publishers. By spring, it was under contract. Clara planted a new tree in the orchard. That April, a white dogwood with blossoms that looked like stars when they bloomed. She didn't say who it was for, but everyone who knew the story understood. Lorraine Adler had no grave. Now she had roots. By the time the 32nd anniversary of Emily's disappearance arrived, the town of Wicklow had changed completely. The trails were better marked. The sheriff's office had more staff. Missing persons reports were taken seriously every time. At the library, a section called Voices Never Lost had been established. Stories of the forgotten. Stories of the found. And front and center, a glass case holding a child's bracelet, a cassette tape, and a journal sealed behind protective glass. Beside it hung a plaque. Emily Bryer, 1980 to 1992. She left us a trail. We followed it. Now we listen. And still, on certain mornings, the lake would shine just right. A shimmer of silver would catch the eye, and someone might remember the glint of a bicycle frame breaking the water's surface, and they would stop and remember, because the story never really ended, not in a town where the trees still whispered her name. In Girl Vanished Leaving Farmhouse in 1992, 31 years later, her bike washes ashore. A quiet Pennsylvania town is forced to reckon with a tragedy long buried, when 12-year-old Emily Bryer disappears during a routine bike ride from her family's farmhouse in the summer of 1992. Her absence shatters her family and casts suspicion in every direction. Despite intense searches, the case goes cold, and her bicycle is never recovered until 31 years later when it surfaces unexpectedly at Harlow Lake. This shocking discovery reignites the investigation and unearths a sinister truth. Emily was abducted and imprisoned by Jacob Whitlow, a reclusive man who had built a network of underground tunnels beneath the town. But Emily wasn't just a victim. Through secret journal entries, hidden cassette tapes, and a haunting final message, she documented her ordeal in vivid, heartbreaking detail. As Sheriff Kepler and Emily's brother Dean retrace her last days, they uncover the involvement of Lorraine Adler, a woman who once tried to save Emily and left behind evidence of her own tragic end. Together, these threads reveal not just one crime, but a history of disappearances, missed warnings, and overlooked women who fought to be heard. The story culminates in a powerful reckoning for the town of Wicklow. Through Emily's words and the quiet bravery of those who refuse to forget her, justice emerges not through vengeance, but through remembrance. A memorial is planted, a book is written, and new protections are put in place to ensure no child's voice is ever ignored again. Emily Brier's legacy becomes more than a cold case. It becomes a catalyst for change, echoing through the orchard, where she once rode her bike, and where at last she is home.